story called Trouble with the Fiend by Sheila Lavelle. It takes some doing to play a trick on the whole class at the same time, but Angela managed to think of a way, and of course, once again, it was me that got the blame. She worked herself up in a right old temper that day, and it was only because everybody laughed at her during the art lesson. Angela hates art anyway, and Miss March is always telling her off for messy, untidy work. It was an interesting sort of lesson, because for a change we weren't doing painting. We were learning how to do that old-fashioned italic writing, and we all had those special pens with thick nibs and little bottles of black Indian ink. We had to copy a poem from the blackboard, and I was quite enjoying making the nice curved shapes of letters and putting fancy squiggly bits on the capitals. I only made 1 or 2 small blots, and on the whole I thought my effort wasn't too bad. Angela, in the desk behind mine, wasn't getting on at all well. Everybody was working away quietly, with Miss March walking around the class looking over our shoulders and helping here and there, so we could all hear Angela sighing and moaning and screwing up her sheet of paper to start again. "This is murder," she hissed in my ear. "This lousy pen doesn't work. It keeps making blobs." "Try a new nib," I whispered, starting on the last line of the verse. Angela clattered out to the front of the class to change her nib from the box on the shelf. When she got back to her place with a fresh piece of paper, she found Miss March looming over her like a mountain. "Angela Mitchell," said Miss March grimly, "I can't believe you haven't even started yet. Your paper's still blank. What have you been doing all this time?" "She's been writing blank verse, miss," said that clever clogs Lawrence Parker, "like Shakespeare." And you should have heard the groans from the rest of the class. "You've only got 5 minutes left," Angela went on Miss March coldly, ignoring Lawrence's remark. "If it's not finished by the end of the lesson, you'll have to stay in after lunch. Now, please get on with it." I hoped Miss March might say something nice about my work on the way past, but she only gave it a quick glance and a nod and walked on. I finished the poem and put a neat little row of dots at the bottom. I blotted the ink carefully with a clean piece of blotting paper. Then I looked over my shoulder at Angela. She was scribbling away like a maniac, her face all red and her fingers smudged with ink. Her paper was a mess, all covered in splashes and dribbles and blotches, and she kept jabbing the pen furiously into the ink bottle as if she was trying to stab it to death. The bell went for lunch, and Angela finished just in time. She slumped back in her seat and flung down the pen with a huge sigh. Miss March came to have a look. She picked up Angela's paper and glared at it in silence for a while. Angela didn't even look at her. She sank down in her chair, her eyes fixed on the desk. "A 5-year-old could have done better than this," said Miss March finally, in a grim sort of voice. It looks as if 10 drunken spiders fell in the ink and crawled all over the page." And of course, that's when the whole class fell about laughing. Not because it was all that funny, but because it was a teacher's joke. Lawrence Parker got the job of collecting all the papers, and everybody else trooped out down the corridor. "Never mind," I said to Angela, giving her arm a squeeze. "At least Miss Quick March didn't keep you in." Angela was hardly listening. She had a very funny look in her eyes. "They didn't have to laugh at me like that," she said moodily. "I'll think of a way to get even with the whole stupid lot of them, you'll see." And all the time we were eating our school dinner in the dining hall, Angela sat like a statue staring into space. She hardly ate any of her stew and carrots and mashed potatoes, or her apple crumble and custard, much to the delight of Lawrence Parker, who scoffed the lot. When we were on our way out into the playground after lunch, Angela grabbed me by the arm. "Charlie," she said, and my heart sank when I saw the gleeful expression on her face. "I've had a fabulous idea." She dragged me along the corridor towards the changing rooms at the end. There was nobody around at this hour, as they were all outside. Angela shoved me down on the bench beside the girls' lockers, and sat beside me. "What's first lesson this afternoon?" she said, making her eyes go all narrow. "Games," I said at once. "It's Tuesday, isn't it? It's games all afternoon." "Right," said Angela. "And what will happen if we take half an hour to get changed?" "Miss March will do her nut," I said. "She only gives us 60 seconds and then she blows that stupid whistle." I looked into Angela's face, hoping for some sort of a clue. "What are you up to?" I said. Angela gave me a quick hug. "You and me, Charlie, are going to cause chaos this afternoon. We're going to mix up all the games kits so that everybody ends up with the wrong shorts and T-shirts and stuff. Can you imagine what it'd be like? It'd be a right old shambles." I could imagine it very clearly, and I was horrified at the thought. I stood up quickly and started to argue, but Angela pushed me down again firmly. "You're not going to say you won't help me, are you?" she said, hands on hips. "Because if you are, I'm never going to be your friend again. So you can make up your mind, Charlie Ellis." And she started pulling shorts and T-shirts and plimsolls out of people's lockers and muddling them up in a heap on the floor. And do you know, for once in my life, it didn't take long for me to make up my mind. I sat there thinking about all the things she'd ever done to get me in trouble, and all the nasty tricks she'd played on me in the past, and I found it wasn't such a horrid decision after all. I was better off without her, if only I could find the courage to tell her so. I jumped up in a hurry before I had time to change my mind. I took a deep breath and looked her straight in the eyes. "Well, I think it's a stupid idea, and it'd just cause trouble for everybody, and Miss March will get mad, and she's sure to keep us in until she finds out who did it. And for once, it's not going to be me that gets the blame, because this time you can do your own dirty work, so there." Angela's mouth dropped open, and she was giving me a real frosty-nosed stare. "All right," she said, "if that's the way you want it. But you'll be sorry, Miss Hoity-Toity Ellis. Don't say I didn't warn you." Angela started rummaging round in the lockers again, and I scuttled off down the corridor as fast as I could to the playground, feeling relieved at my escape. And when I got outside, I found that nice new girl, Nicola Daly, sitting all by herself on the wall in the sunshine. She's tall and skinny like me, and she's got lovely long shiny brown hair, and she's going to be a dancer when she grows up. Anyway, she gave me such a nice big smile when she saw me that I went over and sat beside her. "Where did you live before you moved here?" I said to start the conversation. "Useley," she told me with a giggle. "It's near Manchester. Funny name for a place, isn't it?" "Not half," I agreed. There was a young lady from Useley, but I had to stop there because I couldn't think of anything to rhyme. "Who always would breakfast on muesli," said Nicola, and we both burst out laughing. So we sat there on the wall, giggling away like anything together and making up a funny poem to send in my next letter to Uncle Barry. And the last line was so awful. I knew my Uncle Barry would love it. "There was a young lady from Useley who always would breakfast on muesli. When asked for her diet, she said you should try it. It's muesli in usually. By the time the bell went, we were the best of friends, and we were enjoying ourselves so much that I'd forgotten all about Angela and her latest plot. It was only when Miss March blew her whistle in the corridor that I remembered, and my stomach suddenly rolled over as if it was full of live eels. "You have 60 seconds to change, starting from now," bellowed Miss March, and everybody rushed to their lockers and started pulling out their games kit. "Hey, this isn't my T-shirt," somebody called out. "I've got the wrong shorts," squealed somebody else. Everybody started shrieking and yelling and fighting and snatching things from one another and chucking plimsolls around, and in no time at all, it was absolute pandemonium. I looked for Angela, and there she was, right in the middle of the fun, giggling helplessly and shouting, Who's got my blooming T-shirt at the top of her voice? Well, some of them didn't half look daft, I can tell you. Angela had even mixed up some of the boys' things with ours, and she was dancing around in an enormous pair of baggy shorts that could only have belonged to Lawrence Parker. That awful Delilah Jones, who is by far the tallest girl in the class, was struggling into a skimpy little T-shirt that hardly came down to her tummy button. Jane Baxter, who was really tiny, had shorts almost down to her ankles and a huge pair of plimsolls that flopped about like flippers when she tried to walk. And they were all making so much noise, you could hardly hear Miss March's whistle. "Get out here at once," stormed Miss March from the corridor, and everybody scrambled towards the door. I was so busy watching the others that I hadn't even started getting changed myself. I quickly pulled off my skirt and blouse and grabbed the stuff in my locker, dreading the sight of what Angela had selected for me. The games kit in my locker was all my own. I stared at the clothes, astonished. I checked the name labels and they all said Charlotte Ellis, and I was baffled. Why hadn't Angela mixed up my things as well? I very soon found out. Miss March was stamping her feet and blowing her whistle like mad by now, and everybody had given up trying to sort out the mess and was tumbling out into the corridor. And it was even funnier out there because the boys all started to hoot with laughter when they saw the girls, and the girls all screamed and giggled when they caught sight of the boys, and the noise was unbelievable. Lawrence Parker was the funniest. He had struggled in the tiniest pair of shorts you ever saw, and his big fat belly was sticking out at the top. He had ripped the T-shirt when putting it on, and it hung in tatters from his shoulders like the Incredible Hulk's. "Silence!" roared Miss March suddenly, and everybody went quiet. "Form 2 lines," she snapped, and everybody shuffled into place, the boys down one side of the corridor and the girls lying behind Nicola Daly, who had one toe in a very small plimsoll and the other foot in one that looked as if it would fit my dad. There was a long silence while Miss March glared at us all. All you could hear was her snorting like a dragon. I expected sparks to come flying out of her nose at any minute. Then she started walking down between the lines, inspecting everybody like a sergeant major in the army, and you could see people's knees tremble as she stopped at each one. Finally, she reached me. She looked me up and down in silence, and then suddenly she grabbed me by the shoulder and peered at the name tags in the back of my T-shirt and shorts. Her mouth went into a grim line, and that's when it hit me like a ton of bricks. I was the only person in the whole class wearing my own things. My dear friend Angela had done it again. "That wasn't very clever of you, Charlotte Ellis," grated Miss March through teeth like tombstones. "It's perfectly clear who is responsible for this riot this afternoon. You will all change back into your ordinary clothes at once, and we will have a free activities afternoon instead of games." She looked at me as if I was the nastiest little creature she had ever set eyes on. "Charlotte Ellis will stay here and sort out this mess. She will put everybody's things exactly where she found them, and there will be no more games for Miss Ellis for the rest of the term." My face went scarlet. I could see Angela grinning like a shark at the front of the line. I felt like punching her right in the nose, I can tell you. "Please, Miss March," I said quickly. "It wasn't me, it was... "Well," said Miss March, folding her arms and waiting. But I closed my mouth tight and tears pricked the back of my eyelids. I found I couldn't tell tales, even on somebody as horrible as Angela. I suppose I'm stupid, but that's the way it is. So everybody else had a lovely afternoon, reading library books, drawing and painting and working at hobbies like sewing and knitting and weaving and stuff. And I spent the rest of the day sorting out all the games kits. It was an awful job, and it took me hours. Only one thing kept me going while I worked. I would walk home with my nice new friend Nicola Daly and tell that Angela Mitchell to go and jump in the river. Things never work out the way you want them. When the bell finally went, I put the last pair of plimsolls thankfully into the right locker and went for my coat. And there was Nicola coming out of the cloakroom, chatting and smiling away, arm in arm with Angela. "Walk home with us, Charlie," invited Angela, cheerfully offering her other arm as if nothing had happened. "I'd rather walk home with a crocodile," I snapped. I meant it too. At least with a crocodile, you always know whose side it's on.